My daughter tried to steal from me in front of everyone. It wasn't in the shadows, nor in secret. It was there, in the cold heart of a bank lit by white lamps, amid glass counters and hurried glances. She slid the paper to me with a dry, almost mechanical gesture, like offering a glass of water. But it wasn't water. It was poison. The pen, light for anyone, weighed a ton in my hand. I saw my name already engraved in the blank space, ready to become a sentence. Signing meant handing over my entire life. Every late night scrubbing floors, every dish washed until my nails split, every silence swallowed to support this same daughter who now pressured me. The smile she forced was a poorly glued mask. Behind it, there was only impatience and greed. Around me, the world seemed to conspire to normalize the absurd. The security guard at the door, a tall white man, watched me as if I were too slow to understand what I was doing. A woman behind me in line sighed loudly, shaking her head, as if my hesitation were proof of stupidity. I felt the invisible weight of those microaggressions. They weren't just looks. They were silent punches pushing me back to my usual place. The black woman who doesn't understand, who gets in the way, who just needs to follow orders. But I understood too well. The air conditioning enveloped me with an excruciating cold, as if it wanted to freeze my bones and hasten my decision. My daughter brushed her fingers against my arm. A quick, uncaring touch, almost an impatient nudge. "Mom, sign now." Her voice was low but firm, like a veiled threat. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It was a silent war. On one side, the daughter I carried in my womb and fed with the little I had. On the other, myself, trying not to give up what little I had left. If I signed, I would lose everything. If I refused, I might lose my daughter. But what if the stakes were even higher? As my eyes ran over the paper, memories flashed through me. I saw myself scrubbing toilets in the wee hours, coming home with swollen knees, hearing neighbors whisper that I'd never amount to anything. I remembered every overdue bill paid with humiliation, every birthday of my daughter saved by a small but lovingly made cake. All of this was now summarized in a document that drove me to the wall. The cashier cleared his throat. His fingers adjusted his glasses, and he frowned. The gesture sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't just checking numbers. His eyes had caught something. Amid the dry lines there was a note. Hidden message. I watched him look up at me, hesitate, and then return to the paper. My daughter noticed. Her jaw tightened, and her lips pressed together. I tried to decipher what was going on in her mind, but all I saw was fear. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of being exposed. My heart raced so fast it seemed to echo in the silent hall. I still didn't know what was written, but I realized it wasn't just a contract. It was a trap, and that someone, perhaps not by chance, had left a clue. I took a deep breath. The smell of paper and ink burned my nostrils. The world around me seemed to move in slow motion. I was facing something that could change everything. And the question formed like a thunderclap inside me. How can a mother continue to be a mother when she discovers that her own daughter is capable of betraying her in this way? When the teller looked up and hesitated, I felt as if all the noise around me had disappeared. The sound of the keys, the low conversations, the hurried footsteps on the polished bank floor. Everything dissolved into silence. Only me, my daughter, and that paper remained. It's strange how an entire life can fit into a simple gesture, a pen about to touch paper. I stood before the abyss, and what held me back was no longer love, but distrust. I looked at my daughter, and in that face I'd once kissed to calm her tears, I no longer recognized tenderness. She looked away, pretended to adjust her bag, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her. It was as if she knew the theater was about to collapse. That was the same face that smiled when she received her first cheap birthday present, the same one that lit up when I returned home with grocery bags, even after a 15-hour workday. Now, that face seemed like a cold, calculating, distant mask. The space around us was stifling. The air conditioning blasted a chilly wind that bit into my skin, as if trying to extinguish any remaining human warmth. I remembered every detail. The metallic sheen of the bars, the chemical smell of fresh paint mixed with the sweet perfume of the woman filling out forms behind us, and the feeling of being small against the white walls that reflected too much light. It was like being in a lit cage. And I wondered, when did I stop being a mother and become just a signature to her? Maybe it was when money started to speak louder than affection, or when she realized that I, tired, didn't have the strength to fight her rush to have more. What cut me to the quick wasn't just the attempted robbery. It was the betrayal. Because there's no greater pain than discovering that the love you offered unconditionally has become a bargaining chip. I breathed slowly, as if each breath were a silent prayer. I felt my eyes well up, but I held them back. Tears at that moment would have been seen as weakness. It wasn't weakness I wanted to show. The cashier, with his furrowed brows, seemed to carry a secret in his eyes. It was as if he were saying without words, "Look again." And I did. In that moment, I realized that my life couldn't be measured solely by the paper in front of me, but by the courage I had to face what was hidden within. It was a battle of silences. Mine, hers, the hesitant cashier's, and even the impatient but curious line. A silence that screamed louder than any words. And perhaps it is for moments like these that so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation with me, because they know that life is made up of these moments in which everything can change. I didn't yet know what was written in those lines, but something told me that the discovery would be like opening a door that could never be closed. And once opened, no one would emerge unscathed. The cashier's gaze lingered a second longer than it should have, and that second weighed on my chest like a wet brick. It wasn't just distrust. It was a kind of silent, almost compassionate warning that made me straighten my spine and swallow my fear. I felt my own breath graze my throat, harsh, as if each breath scraped away memories I'd rather not touch. My daughter pretended to check her phone, and that hurried choreography only made her nervousness more evident. Her purse was wide open, her lipstick crooked in the lid, her freshly manicured nails still glistening under the white light. Money has shine, so does guilt. I saw myself reflected in the glass counter. A woman with her hair tied up haphazardly, the scarf I'd chosen out of habit, the dark coat. I seemed simple, invisible. That's how they wanted me to be. A polite shadow signing without asking. The contrast between the clinical overhead light and the shadow forming beneath my hands made me think about how much my entire life I'd been teetering between these two extremes. Hope and fear. Hope when I folded towels late at night, thinking that one day my daughter would understand how much it cost. Fear when I realized that, to many, I was just the employee who smiles and delivers. The paper exuded the delicate scent of new ink. I slid my eyes over the lines, feeling as if I were walking on a glass floor, fearing that any misstep would open a crack. In line, a man muttered something like, "This is going on forever," and I didn't need to look to know the impatient expression was accompanied by that familiar raised eyebrow. The employee at the next desk, a young white woman, chuckled softly at something on the computer, and the laughter hit me like a cold wind. It's funny how small, banal gestures seem to push us to the place of, "I don't belong." I thought about the house. The floor with its old marks, the lingering smell of brewed coffee, the curtain I hand-embroidered for her room when she was little. I thought about the drawer where I keep my monthly bills, carefully folded, like someone storing medicine. I thought about my retirement, not as numbers, but as a thin blanket protecting me from the early morning breeze. Signing there was like ripping off that blanket and leaving my entire body at the mercy of the cold. And yet, the worst part was my daughter's face, lit by a rush that wasn't of need, but of desire. There was no hunger in her eyes. There was ambition. The cashier cleared his throat softly, and that small sound opened a crack in the scene. The digital clock on the wall blinked, alternating between time and temperature, and I realized time was passing like sand through my fingers. Every second was a chance to say no, and also a chance to regret not having said it. I felt my palm clammy, the pen slipping, my heart pounding loud enough for me to almost hear. My daughter leaned in close, as if to stand between me and the world, and whispered that it was just to make our lives easier. The word "our" hung in the air, limp, ownerless. Suddenly, an old memory came back to me. I was younger, standing at another table, asking the manager for time to pay a bill. The look I received then was the same as now. Calculated, assessing how much dignity I would give up to keep the light on. I survived that night with an empty stomach and watery coffee. I've survived many like that. The difference is that now the dispute was with the one I loved above myself. And that made everything fiercer. The pen touched the paper. Tiny touch, almost nothing. And that was enough for the cashier to take a deep breath and say my name, slowly, as if asking for permission. He didn't look at my daughter. He looked at me, and only me, as if he wanted to give me back something they were trying to take from me. I felt a rush of heat rise up the back of my neck. There was something there that deviated from the script my daughter had prepared. I glanced at the corner of the sheet. There was a slight, intentional fold, and beneath it a paler rectangle, as if someone had glued and peeled off a sticker. The light hit it and revealed the edge of a small, almost imperceptible collage. I still didn't know what they were hiding, but now I understood why the cashier was taking so long. He was hunting for a detail, a tiny secret buried in plain sight. Urgency tightened my chest. I felt my legs grow heavy, the ground sliding away, as if I were on a boat. My daughter noticed the cashier's movement and leaned forward, preparing to interrupt. I saw the shadow of her hand cast over my wrist, and I backed away a centimeter. It was enough for her to give a short, almost nervous smile, and for the security guard to take 2 steps closer, discreet, with that presence that feigns neutrality but chooses sides. The ceiling's reflection splashed against the glass, and I thought of light and darkness again. How a lamp that's too bright hurts the eyes and at the same time prevents us from saying, "I didn't see." Not everything, but enough to feel that the truth was about to tear through the veneer of that moment. And even without knowing the price, I knew I couldn't be pushed any further. Not by fear, not by shame, not by the habit of giving in. The cashier carefully pulled the paper away, like someone holding a wounded bird, and before my daughter could say anything, he brought his face closer and inhaled, deciding something within himself. His breathing changed. Mine did too. The aisle next door seemed to stretch, the air thickened, and the clock blinked again. Time and temperature. Time and temperature. The kind of repetition that announces a break. I don't know what words would have come out of his mouth, but I recognized the exact moment when the mask of everyday life cracks and the truth breaks through. And when it does, neither silence nor haste, nor white light can stop the roar that follows. The cashier took a deep breath and held the paper for a moment longer, almost solemnly. That small gesture seemed to shift time, as if the world outside had stopped moving. I saw his hand move slowly, folding the sheet to reveal what was hidden. It was just a corner, a pale mark, but in that instant it became a flash, a silent clue that nothing there was as simple as it seemed. My daughter tried to speak, her voice quick, with that tone of someone afraid of losing control of the narrative. But the cashier didn't relent. He held my gaze, and in that look there was something unexpected. It wasn't just professionalism, it was humanity, as if saying without words that I had the right to hesitate, the right to be suspicious, the right not to be pushed into an abyss in silence. That spark, so small and intimate, warmed my chest for a second, a rare breath amidst the ice of betrayal. As the air conditioning blew a biting breeze, I thought about the stark contrast between that artificial cold and the warmth I cherish from my memories. I remembered the backyard of my old house, the sun beating down on the clothes on the clothesline, my daughter, still a little girl, running between colorful sheets, laughing at silly things. The same child I'd rocked when I was afraid of the dark. Now, as an adult, she was the one casting a shadow over me. This paradox throbbed within me. How could someone who was once my shelter turn into a storm? In line, I heard another impatient sigh. The sound echoed like a judgment call, as if everyone had already decided I was too slow, too confused, a lady disrupting the flow of a fast-paced world. But there was more at stake than simple paperwork. There was a lifetime of memories. And it was at that point that I realized that many who follow stories like mine feel the need to offer silent support, almost as a gesture of complicity. It's as if leaving a sign, a touch of approval, was also a way of saying, "I understand the pain you carry." The cashier, still silent, placed his finger on the fold of the paper. I approached, breathless. My daughter pressed her lips together, her jaw clenched, and gave him a hard look, as if to intimidate. But there was no way to erase the detail that emerged. It was fragile and powerful at the same time, like a small crack heralding the collapse of an entire wall. In this suspended space, I realized how much silence speaks. The silence of the other customers, who now seemed too attentive. The silence of my daughter, who could no longer find justification. The silence of the bank itself, which suddenly became a stage. And at the center of this stage, I, a woman who had learned her whole life to lower her head, but who now felt a different weight transform into strength. I closed my eyes for a moment, just to listen to my own heart. It beat loudly, steadily. And in that sound there was more than fear. There was a warning. Something was about to reveal itself. Something not even my daughter could deny. The paper was still there between the three of us. And I knew that when the truth finally came out, nothing would ever be the same again. The teller's finger slid slowly across the crease, and that small mark became a portal of silence. It had been almost invisible, but now it looked like a scar gaping open in the middle of the paper. I felt the cold of the bank intensify, as if the air conditioning had decided to freeze me to the bone. My daughter was breathing fast, nervously, trying to appear calm, but with each passing second her mask was cracking more. The contrast tore at me inside. On one side, the fear of losing everything. My home, the security of the days to come, the dignity of someone who had fought all her life. On the other, a timid, almost clandestine hope that appeared in the cashier's eyes. It was like a flame hidden beneath the ash, insisting that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone on that battlefield. I stared at the white lights reflected in the glass of the counter. They were so bright they hurt my eyes, yet they still couldn't hide the shadows forming in the corners of the room. This play of light and darkness seemed to repeat my life. Moments that made me believe I'd achieved stability, followed by periods when everything fell apart. It was like walking down an endless corridor, with doors that opened and closed without warning. My daughter's hand lightly touched my elbow, but there was no tenderness. It was a disguised squeeze, a reminder that she was still trying to guide my gesture. Her skin felt too hot, contrasting with the metallic chill of the room. It was as if two worlds collided, the warmth of her insistence and the ice of the approaching truth. In line, I noticed that some people were already observing too much. They weren't just impatient customers. It was the kind of curiosity that arises when everyone senses something unexpected is about to happen. The bank, previously just a backdrop, became a stage. And I, despite myself, was the central figure. The souvenirs continued to mingle with the present. I saw my little daughter sleeping on my lap, and the light weight of her breathing filled me with purpose. Now, as an adult, her breathing was rapid, ragged, like that of someone about to be unmasked. This contrast tore me apart. How could the same chest that was once my refuge now harbor the knife pointed at me? The cashier took a deep breath and adjusted his glasses. The movement seemed slow, calculated, as if he'd decided to cross a line that would change everything. My eyes followed his, and I realized how much my entire life fit into that moment. The seemingly banal piece of paper had become the field where hope and fear battled head to head. And I knew, without words, that what would come next would not be just the revelation of a detail. It would be the opening of a door that, once wide open, could never be closed again. The silence seemed to stretch between us, thick as a rope about to snap. The paper remained on the counter, motionless, but it was as if it breathed, pulsated, as if it carried a secret greater than the space of that room could hold. I observed every detail around me with almost painful clarity. The clock on the wall blinking in rhythmic intervals, the steady hum of the air conditioning, the reflection of my own face in the glass, torn between light and shadow. Inside me, hope and fear intertwined like two bodies of water that never mix, but flow side by side. Hope told me that the detail hidden in the paper could be my salvation, proof that I wasn't imagining anything, that the danger was real and visible. Fear, however, whispered that perhaps it was too late, that the damage had already been done, that my daughter would find another way to surround me. These two voices clashed relentlessly, turning every heartbeat into a battle. I looked at my daughter, and the contrast pierced me like a lightning bolt. Her face, still so young, bore signs of anxiety. Her breathing was rapid, her eyes darting to all sides, her hands restless. It was as if she were about to be exposed, yet at the same time willing to fight until the last moment to maintain control. With every second, the blood bond between us was unraveling into almost invisible threads, like ancient fabric slowly tearing. The cashier, firm but silent, adjusted his glasses again. A simple gesture, but one that gave me the impression he was also trying to see not just what was on the paper, but the truth hidden behind our expressions. It made me feel vulnerable, yet strangely supported. As if someone finally saw what I carried without being able to name. I considered what was at risk. Not just the money I'd saved so diligently, but the sense of security it represented. My home, where every object holds a memory. My freedom to decide my own destiny. My peace of mind, earned with so many scars. It was more than numbers on a contract. It was my entire life reduced to lines and signatures. The room seemed smaller with each passing moment, as if the walls were moving ever closer. The harsh glare from the overhead lights blinded me for moments, creating dark patches before my eyes. This play of light and shadow reminded me of everything I'd experienced. The late nights working until my body ached, believing my daughter would have a different life, and the mornings listening to snide remarks telling me that, for people like me, there would always be limits. The light that promised clarity was always accompanied by the shadow that weighed me down. And now I was there between the two. The pen still rested in my hand, cold, almost slippery. A small gesture was enough to change everything, but the invisible weight of that choice paralyzed me. It wasn't just a signature. It was the thread separating what I still had from absolute emptiness. The cashier took a deep breath, as if about to break the silence with words. My daughter leaned forward, trying to intervene before anything else could be said. And I, caught between the two forces, felt that the next second would be decisive. I didn't yet know what truth would emerge, but I was certain it could no longer be contained. The next moment seemed to stretch like a thread stretched too thin, about to snap. The cashier kept his eyes fixed on the paper, but I knew he wasn't just seeing words. He saw the weight those lines carried, the drama that wasn't written there, but etched on my face and my daughter's. With each passing second, the contrast between us became more apparent. I, motionless, trying to protect what was left of my dignity. She, restless, every gesture betraying the panic of someone who knows the sandcastle is about to crumble. A tiny, almost invisible detail had already altered the entire atmosphere of the bank. The air seemed thicker, as if every breath needed to be earned. Even the customers in line shifted, some whispering, others observing, creating a curious silence that was no longer one of impatience, but of anticipation. The public space had become the stage for a private scene, and I could no longer pretend this was just a contract. My thoughts raced, and it was impossible not to imagine what would happen next. What would happen if that truth came to light? I could see in my mind the neighbors' reactions, the comments that would arise, the arguments at family dinners, the sidelong glances of acquaintances who always wait to see how much longer a woman like me can last before breaking. It was like watching a movie in slow motion, knowing that every reaction would leave a deep scar. The contrast between effort and reward pierced me. A lifetime of work, of sleepless nights, of calloused hands, now risked becoming nothing more than a bitter memory. But at the same time, there was the possibility of an unexpected return, that of seeing justice materialize, even if silently, discreetly, like a crack that opens until it brings down an entire wall. The cashier cleared his throat, and that short sound seemed to me like the prelude to a revelation. My daughter, almost instinctively, gripped the arm of the chair next to her, her nails digging into the upholstery, as if she needed something to hold on to so she wouldn't collapse. Her reaction made me think of how small actions always carry immense consequences. The attempt to rush my signature, the poorly disguised calm, the nervous smile. All of these were now becoming visible signs for any attentive eye. And I realized that stories like this live not only in the silence of those who feel them, but also in the voices of those who share them. Perhaps that's why so many recognize themselves in these wounds and at some point feel the urge to leave their own impressions, their reflections, as if each comment were a way of stitching together this torn fabric of life. The cashier took another deep breath, his hand still hesitantly on the paper. The weight of the moment was becoming unbearable, and I knew the line between secrecy and revelation was about to break. But until that happened, all that remained was this suspense, the paralyzing fear, the persistent hope, and the silence that screams louder than any words. The paper remained between us like a distorted mirror. Each printed line seemed to reflect not only numbers and clauses, but all the fragility I carried in that moment. The cashier hesitated, and this hesitation became the beat of an invisible drum, marking time that no longer obeyed the clock on the wall. I felt each second pass through my skin, as if trapped in a glass hourglass where the grains of sand fell too slowly. My daughter tried to compose herself, but it was impossible to ignore her nervousness. The sheen of sweat on her forehead, the way her fingers tapped against her purse, her unblinking gaze. It was a portrait of fear disguised as authority. The contrast between her haste and the cashier's forced calm created an almost palpable tension, like two forces pushing against each other without touching. I was in the middle, feeling the weight of both sides. The bank seemed to be transforming. It was no longer just a place of cold transactions and numbers. It had become a setting charged with expectation, a stage illuminated by two white lights, where every gesture took on meaning. The mere clearing of someone's throat in the background sounded like a warning. The creaking of a chair was an uncomfortable echo, and even the faint clink of coins being counted at another table seemed to announce that something inevitable was approaching. I found myself in two worlds at once. In the present, standing at the counter, holding the pen with trembling fingers. In the past, remembering every battle to keep the house afloat, every sidelong glance I'd had to swallow in silence, every promise I'd made to myself that one day I'd find peace. These worlds overlapped, creating a dizzying sensation. It was like walking on a narrow bridge, knowing that one false step could send me back into the abyss. And then there was the future, still hazy, but pulsing like a threat or a promise. I could imagine two distinct scenes. On one side, me leaving defeated, with empty hands and a broken heart. On the other, me raising my head as the truth revealed itself, breaking the cycle of silence and submission. This duality presented itself before me like two opposing mirrors, each showing a possible reflection. The cashier, with an almost imperceptible gesture, slid his thumb over the fold of the paper. It was a slow movement, but enough to create a collective shiver. My daughter held her breath. So did I. That simple swipe seemed to announce that something hidden was about to come to light. The nearly invisible detail took on immense proportions, like a crack in a dam about to burst. And it was in that moment that I realized. It wasn't just the content of the paper that mattered, but what it represented. It was the embodiment of every time I tried to be silenced, every humiliation disguised as carelessness, every forced silence. Now, in front of everyone, there was a chance to transform that silence into a voice. But the moment wasn't fulfilled yet. It hung in the air like a held breath. The cashier said nothing, my daughter didn't dare move, and I stood there, feeling the thin line between darkness and clarity about to be crossed, but unsure which side I would fall on. The cashier's finger rested on the fold for a moment longer, and that prolonged pause became a corridor of silence where every beat of my heart echoed too loudly. The paper was no longer just a document. It was like a glass wall about to crack before everyone's eyes, revealing what lay hidden behind. I felt the tension vibrate in the air, as if the room itself were breathing with me, awaiting the revelation that had yet to come. My daughter tried to maintain control, but her breathing betrayed her. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for complicity in the faces of others, but found only indifference or curiosity. With her every gesture, I saw not only the woman trying to force me to sign, but also the child who once sought my lap when the storm frightened. It was this contrast that hurt the most, seeing how time had transformed shelter into threat, affection into poison. The entire bank seemed different now. The white overhead lights no longer illuminated, they burned. The air conditioning's coldness no longer refreshed, it cut through. The clink of a pen on the counter nearby sounded like a gong, announcing that something was about to break. Every detail of the scene took on symbolic weight, as if the universe had chosen that moment to set all the pieces in motion. I could sense the invisible consequences forming even before the revelation. I imagined the neighbors' comments, the conversations across the street, the judgmental looks disguised as pity. But I also saw, in the corner of my mind, the possibility of another consequence. That of finally being heard, of finally no longer having to carry the burden of silence alone. It was as if two doors stood before me, one leading to darkness, the other to light, and I didn't know which one would open. The contrast was almost cruel. On one side, the throbbing doubt, the fear of losing everything I'd built. On the other, the incipient confidence that something greater was about to happen, something that couldn't be hidden forever. It was like walking a narrow road with chasms on both sides, feeling like the ground might give way with every step. My hand still held the pen, but I no longer thought about the signature. Its weight was symbolic, not practical. It was a reminder of all the times I'd silently given in, of all the occasions I'd let others decide for me. Now, in front of everyone, that pen was also a limit. And I knew that, once I crossed it, any outcome would leave marks that no one could erase. The cashier took a deep breath, leaned his face closer to the paper, and narrowed his eyes, as if finally seeing the line others pretended not to see. My daughter stiffened, her fingers gripping her purse like claws. I, between them, felt that the next moment no longer belonged to me, but to a greater force that had already set in motion. And it was on that threshold that I understood. The truth was there, within everyone's reach, yet still trapped in a thick silence. All it took was a gesture, a word, and it would overflow. I closed my eyes for a second, and in that darkness I saw the clarity that had not yet arrived. When I opened them again, the world seemed suspended, as if everyone were waiting, in unison, for the sound that would shatter that fragile balance. The seemingly endless moment split in two when the cashier raised his voice, low but firm, as if carrying a weight greater than the paper in his hands. He pointed to the discreet fold, to the hidden note that had remained invisible until then. The revelation came not with shouts, but with a silence that engulfed the entire room. The breathing of the customers in line stopped, the creaking of chairs stopped, and even the cold air seemed to suspend in space. My daughter, previously anxious, now froze in nervous rigidity. Her face, which had so often smiled at my achievements, now transformed into a mask of despair. I felt a wave course through me. It was as if the cold ground beneath my feet, so hard and unforgiving for years, suddenly gave way and gave me back my ground. What lay before me wasn't just a failed signature or a shady contract. It was a chance to finally show everyone that kindness isn't synonymous with blindness, that patience isn't synonymous with weakness. Images multiplied in my mind. I saw the house I'd struggled to keep standing, the nights I'd washed clothes until sunrise, the times I'd walked through aching bones to stay awake for work. I also saw the sidelong glances, the whispered jokes, the judgments hidden behind polite smiles. It all converged on that moment. Every humiliation I'd suffered, every forced silence, every renunciation was now transformed into a flash of truth that no one could extinguish. The contrast was brutal. On one side, the fear that had kept me submissive for so long. On the other, the triumph of realizing I could stand up before everyone, without lowering my eyes. It was like crossing a narrow bridge and finally stepping onto solid ground. I no longer cared if they would judge me, if they would whisper behind my back. I had conquered my greatest enemy, the doubt within me. I looked around. I saw attentive gazes, some sympathetic, others merely curious. And I realized that each witness to that moment carried with them a lesson. Perhaps not everyone understood the depth of what was happening, but each would leave knowing that silence can, indeed, be broken. It's at this time that many feel the urge to make their presence felt, to leave a sign that they too recognize themselves in the struggle. Whether it's a word, a gesture, or even the simple act of liking and commenting, as if to say, "Your voice has reached me." Because stories like this aren't just mine. They're stories of everyone who has had to fight against betrayal, injustice, and the weight of the invisible. And if you've chosen to stay this far, following every held breath, every shadow, and every light, know that this too is an act of resistance. It's proof that there's value in listening, in sharing, in transforming silence into an echo. So, if this story touched you, allow yourself to be present not just as a spectator, but as a living part of this journey. Like, comment, subscribe. This gesture isn't just for me, but so that every silenced voice finds space to rise up. I left the bank that day feeling different. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I walked, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, like someone taking a deep breath after years underwater. The pain was still there, but now it was accompanied by something greater. The certainty that resistance is, in itself, a form of victory. And so, having you here, witnessing with me, is a privilege that transforms what was once loneliness into shared strength.